Chapter 8 The Chateau d'If. The commissary of police, as he traversed the antechamber, made a sign to two gendarmes who placed themselves one on Dantès' right and the other on his left. A door that communicated with the Palace of Justice was opened, and they traversed a long range of gloomy corridors whose appearance might have made even the boldest shudder. The Palace of Justice communicated with the prison, a sombre edifice that from its grated windows looks on the clock tower of the Aquilée. After numberless windings, Dantès saw an iron door. The commissary knocked thrice, every blow seeming to Dantès as if it struck on his heart. The door opened. The two gendarmes gently pushed him forward, and the door closed with a loud sound behind him. The air he inhaled was no longer pure, but thick and mephitic. He was in prison. He was conducted to a tolerably neat chamber, but grated and barred, and its appearance, therefore, did not greatly alarm him. Besides, the words of Villefort, who seemed to interest himself so much, resounded still in his ears like a promise of freedom. It was 4 o'clock when Dantès was placed in this chamber. It was, as we have said, the 1st of March, and the prisoner was soon buried in darkness. The obscurity augmented the acuteness of his hearing. At the slightest sound, he rose and hastened to the door, convinced they were about to liberate him. But the sound died away, and Dantès sank again into his seat. At last, about 10 o'clock, and just as Dantès began to despair, steps were heard in the corridor. A key turned in the lock, the bolts creaked, the massy oaken door flew open, and a flood of light from 2 torches pervaded the apartment. By the torchlight, Dantès saw the glittering sabres and carbines of 4 gendarmes. He had advanced at first, but stopped at the sight of this fresh accession of force. "Are you come to fetch me?" asked he. "Yes," replied a gendarme. "By the orders of the deputy of the king's prosecutor?" "I believe so." The conviction that they came from Monsieur de Villefort relieved all Dantès' apprehensions. He advanced calmly and placed himself in the center of the escort. A carriage waited at the door, the coachman was on the box, and an exempt seated behind him. "Is this carriage for me?" said Dantès. "It is for you," replied a gendarme. Dantès was about to speak, but feeling himself urged forward, and having neither the power nor the intention to resist, he mounted the steps and was in an instant seated inside between 2 gendarmes. The 2 others took their places opposite, and the carriage rolled heavily over the stones. The prisoner glanced at the windows. They were grated. He had changed his prison for another that was conveying him he knew not whither. Through the grating, however, Dantès saw they were passing through the Rue Casseret and by the Quai Saint-Laurent and the Rue Taramis to the port. The carriage stopped. The exempt descended, approached the guardhouse. A dozen soldiers came out and formed themselves in order. Dantès saw the reflection of their muskets by the light of the lamps on the quay. "Can all this force be summoned on my account?" thought he. The exempt opened the door, which was locked, and without speaking a word, answered Dantès' question, for he saw between the ranks of the soldiers a passage formed from the carriage to the port. 2 gendarmes who were opposite to him descended first. Then he was ordered to alight, and the gendarmes on each side of him followed his example. They advanced towards a boat, which a custom-house officer held by a chain near the quay. The soldiers looked at Dantès with an air of stupid curiosity. In an instant he was placed in the stern sheets of the boat between the gendarmes, whilst the exempt stationed himself at the bow. A shove sent the boat adrift, and 4 sturdy oarsmen impelled it rapidly towards the pilon. At a shout from the boat, the chain that closes the mouth of the port was lowered, and in a second they were outside the harbor. The prisoner's first feeling was joy at again breathing the pure air, for air is freedom. But he soon sighed, for he passed before La Réserve, where he had that morning been so happy, and now through the open windows came the laughter and revelry of a ball. Dantès folded his hands, raised his eyes to heaven, and prayed fervently. The boat continued her voyage. They had passed the Tête de Mort, were now in front of the lighthouse, and now about to double the battery. This maneuver was incomprehensible to Dantès. "Whither are you taking me?" asked he. "You will soon know." "But still, We are forbidden to give you any explanation." Dantes knew that nothing would be more absurd than to question subordinates who were forbidden to reply and remain silent. The most vague and wild thoughts passed through his mind. The boat they were in could not make a long voyage. There was no vessel at anchor outside the harbor. He thought perhaps they were going to leave him on some distant point. He was not bound, nor had they made any attempt to handcuff him. This seemed a good augury. Besides, had not the deputy, who had been so kind to him, told him that provided he did not pronounce the dreaded name of Noirtier, he had nothing to apprehend? Had not Villefort in his presence destroyed the fatal letter, the only proof against him? He waited silently, striving to pierce through the darkness. They had left the Île Ratonneau, where the lighthouse stood on the right, and were now opposite the Point de Catalans. It seemed to the prisoner that he could distinguish a female form on the beach, for it was there Mercedes dwelt. How was it that a presentiment did not warn Mercedes her lover was near her? One light alone was visible, and Dantes recognized it as coming from the chamber of Mercedes. A loud cry could be heard by her. He did not utter it. What would his guards think if they heard him shout like a madman? He remained silent, his eyes fixed upon the light. The boat went on, but the prisoner only thought of Mercedes. A rising ground hid the light. Dantes turned and perceived they had got out to sea. Whilst he had been absorbed in thought, they had hoisted the sail. In spite of his repugnance to address the guards, Dantes turned to the nearest gendarme, and taking his hand, "Comrade," said he, "I adjure you as a Christian and a soldier to tell me where we are going. I am Captain Dantes, a loyal Frenchman, though accused of treason. Tell me where you are conducting me, and I promise you on my honor I will submit to my fate." The gendarme looked irresolutely at his companion, who returned for an answer a sigh that said, "I see no great harm in telling him now." And the gendarme replied, "You are a native of Marseille and a sailor, and yet you do not know where you are going? On my honor, I have no idea. That is impossible. I swear to you it is true. Tell me, I entreat. But my orders? Your orders do not forbid you telling me what I must know in 10 minutes, in half an hour, or an hour. You see, I cannot escape, even if I intended. Unless you are blind, or have never been outside the harbor, you must know. I do not. Look round you, then." Dantes rose and looked forward, when he saw rise within 100 yards of him the black and frowning rock on which stands the Chateau d'If. This gloomy fortress, which has for more than 300 years furnished food for so many wild legends, seemed to Dantes like a scaffold to a malefactor. "The Chateau d'If!" cried he. "What are we going there for?" The gendarme smiled. "I am not going there to be imprisoned," said Dantes. "It is only used for political prisoners. I have committed no crime. Are there any magistrates or judges at the Chateau d'If?" "There are only," said the gendarme, "a governor, a garrison, turnkeys, and good thick walls. Come, come, do not look so astonished, or you will make me think you are laughing at me in return for my good nature." Dantes pressed the gendarme's hand as though he would crush it. "You think, then," said he, "that I am conducted to the chateau to be imprisoned there?" "It is probable, but there is no occasion to squeeze so hard. Without any formality. All the formalities have been gone through. In spite of Monsieur de Villefort's promises?" "I do not know what Monsieur de Villefort promised you," said the gendarme, "but I know we are taking you to the Chateau d'If." "But what are you doing? Help! Comrades, help!" By a rapid movement, which the gendarme's practiced eye had perceived, Dantes sprang forward to precipitate himself into the sea. But 4 vigorous arms seized him as his feet quitted the flooring of the boat. He fell back, foaming with rage. "Good," said the gendarme, placing his knee on his chest. "Believe soft-spoken gentlemen again. Hark ye, my friend, I have disobeyed my first order, but I will not disobey the second, and if you move, I lodge a bullet in your brain." And he leveled his carbine at Dantes, who felt the muzzle touch his head. For a moment the idea of struggling crossed his mind, and so ending the unexpected evil it had overtaken him. But he bethought him of Monsieur de Villefort's promise, and besides, death in a boat from the hand of a gendarme seemed too terrible. He remained motionless, but gnashing his teeth with fury. At this moment a violent shock made the bark tremble. One of the sailors leaped on shore, a cord creaked as it ran through a pulley, and Dantes guessed they were at the end of the voyage. His guardians, taking hold of his arms, forced him to rise and dragged him towards the steps that lead to the gate of the fortress, whilst the exempt followed, armed with a carbine and a bayonet. Dantes made no resistance. He was like a man in a dream. He saw soldiers who stationed themselves on the sides. He felt himself forced up fresh stairs. He perceived he passed through a door, and the door closed behind him, but all this as mechanically as through a mist, nothing distinctly. They halted for a minute, during which he strove to collect his thoughts. He looked around. He was in a court surrounded by high walls. He heard the measured tread of sentinels, and as they passed, before the light he saw the barrels of their muskets shine. They waited upwards of 10 minutes. Certain Dantes could not escape, the gendarmes released him. They seemed awaiting orders. The orders arrived. "Where is the prisoner?" said a voice. "Here," replied the gendarmes. "Let him follow me. I am going to conduct him to his room." "Go," said the gendarmes, pushing Dantes. The prisoner followed his conductor, who led him into a room almost underground, whose bare and reeking walls seemed as though impregnated with tears. A lamp placed on a stool illumined the apartment faintly and showed Dantes the features of his conductor, an under-jailer, ill-clothed and of sullen appearance. "Here is your chamber for tonight," said he. "It is late, and Monsieur le Governor is asleep. Tomorrow, perhaps, he may change you. In the meantime there is bread, water, and fresh straw, and that is all a prisoner can wish for. Good night." And before Dantes could open his mouth, before he had noticed where the jailer placed his bread or the water, before he had glanced towards the corner where the straw was, the jailer disappeared, taking with him the lamp. Dantes was alone in darkness and in silence, cold as the shadows that he felt breathe on his burning forehead. With the first dawn of day, the jailer returned, with orders to leave Dantes where he was. He found the prisoner in the same position, as if fixed there, his eyes swollen with weeping. He had passed the night standing and without sleep. The jailer advanced. Dantes appeared not to perceive him. He touched him on the shoulder. Edmund started. "Have you not slept?" said the jailer. "I do not know," replied Dantes. The jailer stared. "Are you hungry?" continued he. "I do not know." "Do you wish for anything?" "I wish to see the governor." The jailer shrugged his shoulders and left the chamber. Dantes followed him with his eyes and stretched forth his hands towards the open door, but the door closed. All his emotion then burst forth. He cast himself on the ground, weeping bitterly, and asking himself what crime he had committed that he was thus punished. The day passed thus. He scarcely tasted food, but walked round and round the cell like a wild beast in its cage. One thought in particular tormented him, namely, that during his journey hither he had sat so still, whereas he might a dozen times have plunged into the sea, and, thanks to his powers of swimming, for which he was famous, have gained the shore, concealed himself until the arrival of a Genoese or Spanish vessel, and escaped to Spain or Italy, where Mercedes and his father could have joined him. He had no fears as to how he should live. Good seamen are welcome everywhere. He spoke Italian like a Tuscan, and Spanish like a Castilian. He would have then been happy, whereas he was now confined in the Chateau d'If, ignorant of the future destiny of his father and Mercedes, and all this because he had trusted to Villefort's promise. The thought was maddening, and Dantes threw himself furiously down on his straw. The next morning the jailer made his appearance. "Well," said the jailer, "are you more reasonable today?" Dantes made no reply. "Come, take courage. Do you want anything in my power to do for you?" "I wish to see the governor." "I have already told you it was impossible." "Why so?" "Because it is not allowed by the rules." "What is allowed, then?" "Better fare, if you pay for it, books, and leave to walk about." "I do not want books. I am satisfied with my food, and I do not care to walk about, but I wish to see the governor." "If you worry me by repeating the same thing, I will not bring you any more to eat." "Well then," said Edmund, "if you do not, I shall die of famine, that is all." The jailer saw by his tone he would be happy to die, and as every prisoner is worth 6 pence a day to his jailer, he replied in a more subdued tone, "What you ask is impossible, but if you are very well behaved you will be allowed to walk about, and some day you will meet the governor, and if he chooses to reply, that is his affair." But, asked Dantes, how long shall I have to wait? Ah, a month, 6 months, a year? It is too long a time. I wish to see him at once. Ah, said the jailer, do not always brood over what is impossible, or you will be mad in a fortnight. You think so? Yes, we have an instance here. It was by always offering 1,000,000 of francs to the governor for his liberty that an abbé became mad, who was in this chamber before you. How long has he left it? 2 years. Was he liberated then? No, he was put in a dungeon. Listen, said Dantes, I am not an abbé. I am not mad. Perhaps I shall be, but at present, unfortunately, I am not. I will make you another offer. What is that? I do not offer you 1,000,000 because I have it not, but I will give you 100 crowns if at the first time you go to Marseille you will seek out a young girl named Mercedes at the Catalans and give her 2 lines from me. If I took them and were detected, I should lose my place, which is worth 2,000 francs a year, so that I should be a great fool to run such a risk for 300. Well, said Dantes, mark this. If you refuse, at least, to tell Mercedes I am here, I will some day hide myself behind the door, and when you enter I will dash out your brains with this stool. Threats? Cried the jailer, retreating and putting himself on the defensive. You are certainly going mad. The abbé began like you, and in 3 days you will want a strait waistcoat. But fortunately there are dungeons here. Dantes whirled the stool round his head. Oh, said the jailer, you shall see the governor at once. That is right, returned Dantes, dropping the stool and sitting on it as if he were in reality mad. The jailer went out and returned in an instant with a corporal and 4 soldiers. By the governor's orders, said he, conduct the prisoner to the story beneath. To the dungeon, then, said the corporal. Yes, we must put the madmen with the madmen. The soldiers seized Dantes, who followed passively. He descended 15 steps, and the door of a dungeon was opened, and he was thrust in. The door closed, and Dantes advanced with outstretched hands until he touched the wall. He then sat down in the corner until his eyes became accustomed to the darkness. The jailer was right. Dantes wanted but little of being utterly mad.